Hello everybody. For some, temptation has a name, but today it is a number, and that number is 456. Because if, like me, you have even an ounce of super unleaded coursing through your veins, and you've gone over to Auto Trader to look at the section marked Ferrari, you won't have failed to notice the 456. Easily, I think, one of the most tempting cars the company has ever made, because for the last decade and a half, it has sat there quietly like a siren, luring people in, saying, yes, yes, buy me. Because it is a car that has 4 seats, 12 cylinders, that classic 6-speed Ferrari gated shifter, and I think looks that get better and better every year. However, like that mythical old sea creature, we all know there is a good reason you haven't been buying these. And today, I'm going to tell you why we're all wrong. Now, videos like this should really come with a health warning. Be advised, repeated exposure to JAYEMM on cars may cause severe damage to your wallet. But, seeing as, if you're like me, you're going to ignore that, let me instead tell you that if you do hit the classifieds after watching this, don't forget to take CarVertical with you, because if you are buying something even a little bit like this, you'll need every bit of help you can get. And in just 60 seconds, they'll give you all the information you might want to know on any potential used car purchase. Particularly with many of these being imports, CarVertical's ability to scan sources from around the world is invaluable. And even better, if you use my discount code JAYEMM, you'll get 20% off the service. So then, what is it that we're talking about today? This is the Ferrari 456, and I believe it is actually one of the most important cars the firm has made in the last 40 years, because this is the car that signaled the arrival of the Luca de Montezemolo era. For me, I think Ferrari's golden period. You see, wind the clock back to the late 1980s, and though Ferrari were building some very iconic cars, well, let's be honest here, the Testarossa, or the 512 TR as it had become, the rest of the firm wasn't looking so great. In Formula One, they were experiencing a fairly major drought, the likes of which they were not to see until, well, now actually. But on the road car side of things, their offerings included things like the 412, their flagship V12 2+2, which itself was built on a platform dating back to the 1970s. The same could also have been said of the Mondial, their V8 2+2, which by this time was becoming increasingly, well, it was always weird, I suppose, but now it was weird and old. But perhaps most embarrassingly, the new 348 landed at the end of the decade, only to be given a thorough whooping by Honda's NSX. And up until then, nobody could have even conceived of the idea of a Honda beating a Ferrari, and yet it did. In terms of, I think, looks, performance, and of course durability, it showed Ferrari they really could have been doing better. And so, with the arrival of one Luca de Montezemolo, Ferrari set about doing just that, both on road and track. Now, on the track side of things, it took a little while to really get going. However, get going they did, because at the end of the 90s, they had produced a world champion in the form of Michael Schumacher. And then for the next few years went on to prove that was no accident. But before they got there, Luca was also able to thoroughly revitalise the road car lineup and perform what I think is a minor miracle, because he managed to both modernise their offerings, but also do this with a very keen eye on Ferrari's heritage. And the first car that we got under this stewardship that I think perfectly exemplified what the Luca era was to be all about is this, the 456. In its name, it is a throwback to Ferraris of old, 456 being the displacement of each individual cylinder, the same naming scheme that gave us the likes of the 250, the 275, the 330 and the 365. So, in case you are wondering, that means up front you have a 5.5 litre V12 and all new design with Ferrari's classic bank angle of 65 degrees and making here 440 horsepower. Allegedly, at some point in the 1980s, Ferrari had considered building a 4-door car, but one of the last things the old man did before he passed away in 1988 at the age of 90 was say, "Not on my watch, lads." And so that idea was nixed, paving the way for this. But interestingly, though today I couldn't actually imagine this looking like anything else, it apparently nearly did. There was, so I am told by this car's owner Graham, another design that Ferrari had more or less ready to go, and they were about to pull the covers off it when BMW showed their new 8 Series. And Ferrari realised what they'd been building was far too close to that. So, not wanting to be copycats, their designer, Pietro Camardella, went back to the drawing board, and inspired by his own Mythos concept car of a few years earlier, came out with this. And in keeping with that theme of both looking forwards and backwards, it is inspired by the shapes of the 1960s. That is why, despite it being a 4-seater, it still has this coupe profile, but it's also very 1990s in its softer lines, its beautiful curves, its lack of 1980s sharp edges. Though today you may also consider its 17-inch wheels rather adorable and very old-fashioned. And there was apparently some controversy as to whether Ferrari was going to stick with pop-up headlights, which they've been using for a little while. At the time, the industry was moving towards the modern style of fixed clear headlights for various different reasons, primarily safety legislation. However, the company wanted to maintain this nice, sleek look that you can get with pop-ups, and they'd spent a lot of money developing them. Damn it, they were going to use them. So yeah, you like pop-ups? Get a 456. For me, one of the most distinctive features are the 2 cutouts in this enormous composite bonnet, which apparently cost so much that back in the day, when these were cheap, you could write the entire car off just by breaking one. And those vents were apparently installed at the request of De Montezemolo, and they're there because he wanted just another little nod to Ferrari's heritage. I really like them. And tragically, when the car was facelifted, becoming the 456M in 1997, those are one of the features that were axed, which is a shame. Through the lens of today, it is also easy to overlook just what a big deal this car was. There was a huge amount in it that was all new for Ferrari, including that gorgeous 5.5 litre engine, including this 6-speed gearbox, and also this interior look and feel. It set the template which really was still being followed by cars as late as the 360. Even the F430, in fact, still uses switches like these over here. But the car with which this is of course most often compared is Ferrari's own 550. That landed 4 years later in 1996, the same year that this was given an automatic variant, the 456 GTA, with a 4-speed torque converter. The 550 never got an automatic, though I did see on Car and Classic earlier there is actually one 550 automatic prototype up for sale. And for somebody, that's got to be the dream car they didn't realise existed. But I think it's fair to say that I speak for the majority of people when I say their dream Ferrari doesn't have an automatic in it. Instead, it's got this. And it's a beautiful gearbox. This one actually is better behaved and lighter than the one in my 550. Exactly why, I couldn't say, but it does make the noise. What's the noise? That's the sound of a Ferrari. And to drive, this thing is just spectacular. Now, I haven't really put my foot down yet because, well, I've just been enjoying it, appreciating it, drinking in all of its many wonderful qualities, and they include some surprising things like the driving position. You see this car with its big long bonnet and you'd imagine that means you're going to be sat back and low down like you are in a modern day Aston Martin, but actually you're not. You sit a little bit high. I've actually got the seat as far down as it will go, but even so, because the bonnet and the dash lie so low and the belt line of the car is also relatively far down, you've got excellent visibility. You feel like you can reach out and touch the road. And you know you're in an old car when you smack the windscreen to say thank you. And in case you're sat there going, what I mean is if you're driving along and someone lets you out, you go, oh, yeah, thank you. Air-cooled 911 owners will know exactly what I'm talking about here. Modern day cars, the windscreen is somewhere over there, and I'm sure for very, very, very good reason, but when you're not having an accident, this is far better. Now, I know that the looks haven't always been universally loved. In particular, those rear lights at the back. They're trying to look like the classic Ferrari Quartet, but apparently, because they were trying to keep this all a very smooth and cohesive design, to try and cut 4 holes in the back and line everything up right, it just wasn't going to work, and so this sort of lozenge was their solution. It's not terrible, I don't hate it, it easily identifies a 456 in case you're struggling to work out whether it's one of those or a 612. And the whole thing is also considerably smaller than its successor, which in some ways is great, makes it very easy and nice to drive and a little bit less daunting, but in others is not so good. The rear seat space, yeah, you can get adults in there, but they'd have to be very understanding, or more likely sort of teenage-sized children, young teenagers, the ones that have just stopped using car seats. The boot also is not enormous, and so I'd view this more as a car for occasional backseat use or big journeys for just the two of you. And even today, I think this car would make an excellent continent cruiser. Around town, it is really, genuinely very easy to drive. All of the controls are nice, light, maybe to a fault. I get onto that in a minute. And then, when you find yourself leaving the village, going onto a national speed limit piece of road, or even better, an autobahn, you can drop a gear and do this. Right here, right now, this is still a quick car. Though it doesn't throw you back in the seat, it just never stops. It keeps going and going all the way to that just over 7,000 RPM red line. And no, it doesn't sing, it doesn't scream like a modern Ferrari. Also, apparently, at Luca's request, he wanted this to be an understated gentleman's express. And I do think maybe he got that a little bit wrong. I would have liked the possibility of a sports exhaust on this. Set that aside, the performance, I got no problem with whatsoever. But it's also just effortless. Any gear, any RPM, it has something. It is an absolute joy to drive this thing. And really, if you were thinking of buying your first Ferrari, I think this would really, really defy expectations, because they get reputations, particularly these older ones, of being difficult to drive, uncomfortable even. And that's just not true of, well, most of them. Maybe it's more the case for, say, the Testarossa, but for these cars, this era, they're really, really good. And if you'll excuse me a moment, I'm just going to enjoy this section. Now, something I've just begun playing with is the little switch down here that has a picture of a damper with an S and an H on it for soft and hard. And that is because way back in 1992, Ferrari fitted this car with adjustable dampers, which is nice. And I hadn't realised, but Graham had got them set in their hard setting. And I'm glad I noticed, because I was about to complain that the ride was a little too firm for my liking. In the 550, when you're in the sporty mode, and Ferrari for the 550 just call it sport, it lights up on the dash and tells you. For this, it doesn't. You've got to look and see where the damper setting is, and you've got soft, medium, and hard. Graham says that he doesn't really notice a difference, but Graham, I'm telling you now, there is a blooming difference, a big one. When you put this into soft, all of a sudden, it just backs off, it becomes a little easier, and yes, a bit floaty, perhaps. I can see why some wouldn't like it. But it also becomes a lot less crashy, a lot less creaky. There's a lot of leather in here, a lot of it is moving, and it's not a particularly silent cabin, but it's not as bad as some others I've experienced. And oh, it's brilliant, properly brilliant in that soft setting. It is genuinely comfortable. And this is something that a lot of modern performance cars have, well, they've just lost. And I'm not talking simply about Porsches and the like. Ferrari actually still do it fairly well. More Bentleys. A Continental GT you just expect to be comfortable, wouldn't you? And yet, they're not. 3-point turn hill start torture test. I'm being cheeky here, and I'm doing it off the brakes and the clutch, which is naughty, but you can, because the clutch is so easy to modulate. And the handbrake, which I should be using, is all the way down here, and you can't really get to it very easily. Ah, there we go. Right, I'm going to put the dampers now in their medium setting, because soft is quite soft. Let's see if that is the balance that you might think for having a bit of fun on a B road. Dynamically, there are just two things that really let this car down. The dampers are not one of them. I really, really like how they work. Yeah, if you want to press on, the hard setting probably is the one that you want, but the rest of the time, stick it in soft and just enjoy a nice cosseting ride. However, what does get in the way? The steering. For the 550, Ferrari brought in a quicker steering rack, and I believe it was the first car that Ferrari made which had this system that we're now quite familiar with, that really keen, darty turn-in. The 550 is built on effectively a shortened version of the tubular steel chassis that we have here. It's 4 inches shorter in terms of wheelbase, which already makes the car keener to turn in, and they've then put in a steering rack, which is something like just over 2 turns lock to lock. It's very keen. The power steering assistance is also a touch different, with both of them having plenty of help at low speed, but the 550 has a servotronic system, I think basically taken from BMW, and I couldn't tell you if this also has it, but if it does, it hasn't been calibrated in the same way. Once you get up to sort of 40, 50, 60 in the 550, the assistance bleeds away, and you get a lot more feel and feedback through the wheel. In this, not so much. And it maybe suits the character of this car a little bit better, but it does mean as an ultimate dynamic thing, it's just not quite as good. And the other element that does let the car down a little bit, and is common really to most 1990s sports cars, the brakes. They work, and the feel is lovely, the response is great, but if you do really start to press on, and you need to lean on them, you will find that very quickly you find the limit of their ability. A 456 was never ever going to be a natural track car, I think that is fairly obvious, but even on the road, particularly say in Autobahn situations, I'd say they're maybe only just up to the task, but then I've heard people say very similar things about those on a McLaren F1. The extra 300 horsepower of this car's modern day equivalent, yeah, it's nice to have, but the 440 is already enough. Better brakes though? Yes, I appreciate those. And once I'm done having a little bit of fun, I pop the car back into its soft mode, I relax, drop myself into these gorgeous leather seats with a very funky design with the seatbelt integrated into it. Oh, I also love the air vent in the back of this door, clearly for the passenger in the rear. There's lots of nice design touches in this car. The trio of vents, the quintet of dials here. It's beautiful. I love it. It's a really, really cool car. Yes, it has its fair share of quirks. It even has, and I'm going to try and get a shot of it working, what you would now call DRS, active aerodynamics. Mad. For 1992. All right, yes, I know, Mitsubishi did it as well, but, you know, Ferrari were doing it too. And I'm very, very grateful to this car's owner, Graham, for having brought it out to me on slightly more familiar roads. The one and only time I previously drove a 456, it was on a road I sort of knew a little bit, but I didn't have too much time, and it was a long, long time ago. And I've spent a lot of years wondering if maybe I was a little bit harsh on the car, because I remember it being just not dynamically the car I wanted it to be. And this was before I had a 550 of my own. Now, though, I can see that, yeah, I think my comments were fair, but this is still a brilliant car for what it is. A comfortable four-seater-ish thing does the job. But you probably knew most of this already, and you probably also knew that there was a reason you haven't bought one of these, and that reason is because the 456 is famed, even in Ferrari circles, for being a fairly needy thing. These are expensive cars to run, never mind that big composite bonnet. I mean things like this engine, for example. Unlike the later 550, it has solid lifters, meaning that servicing is a little more involved and a little more expensive. In case you were also wondering, the key difference between this engine and the 550s is not just that, but that the 550s also has variable intake geometry. And that is why on the 550, the engine looks marginally different, with that little chamber added between the two existing ones, as you have here. It's for the second length of intake. I believe the shorter one, which gives you more power at the top end. The 550 having another 40 horsepower over this, but just 14 pounds-feet more torque. Now, though these cars don't suffer from the sticky switch syndrome that, say, the 550 and other Ferraris do, because they were painted from the factory, they do still have many other issues. The leather can go funny, but that's general old school car with leather in it. This one actually is in really, really excellent condition, and I've got to give special mention to the colour. Blue swatters. It's beautiful. I don't think the 456 is a car that suits Rosso Corsa. It looks a bit weird and awkward when you see one in it. It's just not its shade. Green, gorgeous. But getting ahead of myself. These cars can and will find any number of different ways to brake, and when they do, it will be expensive. And if it's expensive, maybe you should consider yourself lucky, because that at least means you can find the part, and there will be, as I'm also finding with the 550, parts you just can't get anymore. And that's problematic. Even things like the window regulators were a well-known and well-documented problem, because, simple though it might sound, there was a bit of a design flaw where water could effectively get into the ECU, corrode it, break it, and then your windows wouldn't work. And you need them to work. However, because Ferrari didn't make the part anymore, at one point in time, if you could find one, it was about £5,000. Now, luckily, there is a solution for that, but there aren't solutions for a great many other things. Even little stuff like the strip, the kick plate below the door. Can't get those. This original radio, if you want to buy one of those, good luck. If someone's got one, they're going to want a huge sum for it. Because of where it is, Ferrari had to get a special one made by Sony that was extra shallow. It doesn't help that for a long time these were also very, very affordable cars. Everybody remembers that famous one on piston heads that went for £17,000. And though that was erroneous even for its day, you could pick up a good one of these for in the 20s, with the manuals always commanding a little bit more money, though I've never managed to work out whether the M is considered the more or the less desirable. It's a later car, and manual M's are rarer, but I prefer the look of the older ones, as do many people, so you pays your money, you takes your choice. And actually, this video is very well timed, because only a few days ago, Sam from Seen Through Glass released a video on a 456 in which he seemed to generally enjoy driving the car, but he said they've got problems and they're probably going to be a bit too expensive for him to run. Sam, you've got to challenge Stradale. Don't tell me that a 456 is too expensive to run. I mean, maybe it's too expensive to run alongside a challenge Stradale, but I don't think it's really going to be wildly different. Have you seen the price of a pair of mirrors for a Stradale? Oof. That's mostly because Rattarossa's bought all the spares for Stradales. But anyway, these are old Ferraris. The fact that they are expensive to run and sometimes can be a bit of a pain, it shouldn't be news to anybody. However, I'll tell you what is. Ahead of this review, I went on Auto Trader to try and get a sense of the pricing of the 456 market. I haven't looked at it for a while, so I thought it'd be good to refresh myself and see where the car sits. And what I found surprised me, because today on Auto Trader, there are no 456s. Not one. Now, I know a lot of cars of this age, maybe they're not Auto Trader things, they're car and classic things, but for Ferraris, you do get these things on Auto Trader. But regardless, I thought, okay, let's head over to car and classic. And the 456 market over there is a bit weird. Cars were still available for 30-something thousand pounds, but high 30-something. And they were automatics. If you then want to get yourself into a nice-looking manual You're now talking about £60,000, and only a few years ago, that would have been the very, very top of the 456 market. And 6 years ago, had you told somebody you'd got a 456 and you wanted 100 grand for it, well, they'd have laughed you off the forum. But now, it's not only not an impossibility, it's a reality. These cars are out there. Most worryingly and frustratingly for me, they appear to be catching up to the 550s, and in some cases overtaking them. In terms of rarity, they are pretty similar. In terms of the drive, they are not quite as good, nor I think are they as good looking. That is one reason why, despite the 550 being the cheaper car when new, these were 180 grand back in the day. Adjusted for inflation, that's 300,000 quid. When I did my first review of a GTC4 Lusso, that car had been optioned to something daft like £330,000. But then when I worked it out, one of these, and they didn't really do options, was nearly that much money anyway, as a base car. They were serious things. Ferrari really put the effort in, and this car set the template for the 550, the 355, the 360, the F430, the 599, the 612, even you could argue really, as it was still the Luca era, the 458 and the F12. And today the company is nearly unrecognizable. Since they went public in 2015, the number of cars they make has changed. The way they do their pricing has changed. Everything about them has changed. And though it's still a brand that I'm passionate for, what made me fall in love with it is this era of car. And right about now, they're still at a price where you can buy one, use it, and drive it, as JayEmm does. But whenever anything as a model entirely disappears from Auto Trader, that is the first warning sign. Collectors know about the 456s. I think they've known for a little while, but now they know that they are really good business. And enthusiasts, I think, are beginning to forgive them. Partly, I think, because they're getting old enough. They're now 30-plus-year-old cars, and 30-plus-year-old cars, you expect issues. So when you get them, you're going to be more forgiving. And at the end of the day, this is a proper Ferrari. Buy one while you can. Because honestly, I think the 456 market, it might be about to go crazy. And I'd like it if it did, because maybe it'd take the 550 market with it. Anyway, that's all from me. I want to say a big thank you to JayEmm, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.